All right, let's dive right in today. We're talking government shakeups, big changes, the kind that make you raise an eyebrow and say, hold on, what's going on here?
And you're not wrong to feel that way. The General Services Administration, GSA for short, has decided they're going to make some serious cuts to consulting contracts.
Yeah, and we're not talking about those little local firms.
No, no, this is aimed squarely at the big guys, the top dogs, the ones who've been raking in billions from government work. We're talking Accenture, Booz, Allen Hamilton, Deloitte, names you definitely know.
Big names, big money, like seriously big.
65 billion in fees projected by 2025, and we're only at the start of 2023. It's a staggering amount. The GSA is basically telling agencies, look, you need to take a long, hard look at every single one of these contracts, figure out what you absolutely cannot live without, and be prepared to axe the rest.
No more Mr. Nice GSA, huh?
Nope, they mean business. It's interesting, though, because they actually sent out an initial memo early in February, but it seems like it didn't quite get the response they were hoping for. So now they've come back with a much more direct, you could say urgent, request.
All right, so they're putting their foot down. But here's the thing that's got me scratching my head. This whole idea of non-essential contracts. How on earth do you even begin to define that?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It seems straightforward on the surface, cut the fluff, keep the essentials, but when you try to put it into practice, it gets very murky, very fast. There's so much room for interpretation, and that's where things could get messy.
Yeah, I mean, what's essential for one agency might be completely irrelevant for another, right?
Absolutely. And the GSA has actually tried to provide some clarification. They've said that non-essential basically refers to any contract where the main deliverable is, let's say, intangible, like a report, research findings, coaching, any kind of artifact. Basically, if you can't hold it in your hand, it's potentially on the chopping block.
So if the main output is knowledge or expertise, as opposed to a physical product, that could be deemed non-essential. That seems pretty broad. And honestly, a bit counterintuitive. I mean, isn't knowledge and expertise essential for making informed decisions?
You're hitting on a really important point, and it's one that a lot of critics are raising. A huge portion of what the government does involves oversight, audits, analysis, all things that often rely heavily on those intangible deliverables, like research and expert advice. Cutting them off abruptly without a very careful and considered approach could actually create a dangerous knowledge gap.
Yeah, we've actually seen this play out in a pretty dramatic way already with the VA, the Department of Veterans
Oh,
Affairs.
absolutely. A real cautionary tale. They initially went all in on this, canceled hundreds of contracts with the goal of saving, I think it was billions of dollars, but then they had to slam on the brakes.
Why? What happened?
Well, it turns out that a lot of those contracts they canceled were actually directly supporting essential veteran healthcare services. So, a bit of an oops moment, to put it mildly.
Wow, that's a pretty big oops, to be honest.
It was a real wake-up call, though, because it very clearly demonstrates how something that might look non-essential on paper, on a spreadsheet somewhere, can actually have incredibly real and significant consequences when you just cut it without thinking it through.
So it's not as simple as cut costs, problem solved, is it? There's a much bigger picture here, a whole ecosystem to consider.
Exactly. It's a balancing act, and honestly, it seems like the GSA might be approaching this a bit too aggressively, too heavy-handedly. There are very real concerns that this approach, this kind of blanket slashing of contracts, without really understanding the full impact, could backfire spectacularly.
Yeah, a bit like performing surgery with a chainsaw.
Kind of, yeah. So now you have the GSA pushing for these cuts, but on the ground, there's a lot of confusion, a lot of anxiety even. How are agencies, how are the companies themselves reacting to all of this?
Right, it's got to be a pretty unnerving situation to be in, especially if you're one of those big consulting firms.
Well, it's a mixed bag, honestly. Some agencies, like the Department of Defense, they're kind of falling in line, issuing their own directives to review and potentially cancel non-essential contracts. But there's a lot of head scratching going on, especially among the companies themselves.
I mean, I can imagine. Consulting services, that's a pretty broad umbrella, right? How are they even supposed to figure out which contracts are actually in danger?
That's the million-dollar question everyone's trying to figure out. It's like trying to hit a moving target in the dark. There's a real lack of clarity around how these contracts are even being identified in the first place. I mean, the government does have specific codes, specific definitions for what constitutes consulting services, but it seems like those might not be being used consistently across the board.
So it's not as simple as checking a box or looking up a code.
Not at all. And some experts have even suggested that some agencies might be resorting to, get this, keyword searches.
Keyword searches, that's insane.
Right. It's almost comical if it weren't so potentially damaging. I mean, imagine your contract getting flagged for termination just because the word consulting appears somewhere in the document.
That's a nightmare scenario.
Yeah.
It sounds like this whole initiative is creating more chaos than clarity. It's no wonder there's so much anxiety, so much uncertainty on all sides.
And it really begs the question, why is the GSA so determined to cut back on consulting in the first place? Is it just about saving money, tightening the belt, or is there something bigger at play here?
Right, like a philosophical shift, maybe? What are the deeper forces driving this sudden aversion to consultants?
Well, one thing that seems to be a major factor is just the sheer scale of government spending on services in general. It's been ballooning in recent years, and it's definitely become a target for cost-cutting measures. Just to put it into perspective, in 2023 alone, agencies spent a staggering $478 billion on services.
$478 billion, that's a lot of money.
It is. And the Department of Defense, the DoD, they account for a huge chunk of that. Over $230 billion, in fact. So you can see why there's some pressure to rein in those costs.
Yeah, those numbers are hard to ignore.
Yeah.
But it still feels like there's something more to it. Is this maybe a signal that the government wants to fundamentally change how it operates, maybe move away from relying so heavily on outside expertise?
That's a fantastic question, and it's one that we'll definitely be exploring further as we go deeper into this. While cost-cutting is definitely a major driver, there are some who believe that this push might actually be signaling a desire to reduce the government's dependence on outside consultants and instead focus on building up their own internal capabilities.
So potentially a major shift in the government workforce. That would be huge.
Yeah.
And is that even feasible? Can the government really attract and retain the kind of specialized talent they need to make this work?
Those are all valid questions. It wouldn't be easy, that's for sure. It would require a massive long-term commitment from agency leadership. But if they can pull it off, the benefits could be significant. Imagine a government where the knowledge, the expertise, stays within the institution instead of constantly flowing out to these high-priced consultants.
Yeah, it's like building their own internal think tanks.
Exactly. But of course, there are a lot of challenges to consider.
Okay, so we've got the GSA pushing for these cuts, potentially a shift in how the government operates, a whole lot of confusion and anxiety in the mix. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's take a closer look at some of the specific concerns that are being raised about the GSA's approach. What are former federal contracting experts worried about? Why are they sounding the alarm? Okay, so we've talked about this whole non-essential thing, but how are agencies actually supposed to find these contracts to cut? Like, if I were a consulting company working with the government, how would I even know if I was in danger?
It's a big question, right? And a good one. There's a lot of anxiety swirling around that. Agencies are supposed to have some kind of clear-cut way to do this.
Yeah, I mean, you would think so, right?
They do, to a certain extent. Like, there are these specific codes, industry codes, that the government uses, to classify all these different types of services they buy.
So there's a system in place, at least for categorizing the work.
There is. And you also have the Federal Acquisition Regulation. That's basically the Bible for government contracting. It actually has definitions in there for what consulting services means.
Okay, so the framework is there.
It is. But that's where the problem comes in, because it doesn't seem like it's actually being applied in any consistent way. And that's what's got a lot of experts worried.
So what are agencies doing instead? Just winging it?
Well, it seems like some of them, instead of actually using those codes and definitions that they're supposed to be using, are going with something much less precise, almost like a shortcut. Keyword searches. Seriously. Keyword searches. To decide the fate of these multi-million-dollar contracts.
It's a recipe for disaster, if you ask me. You could end up cutting things that are absolutely essential but just don't have the right wording, while other contracts sail right through because they're worded more cleverly.
So much for a strategic approach. It's like trying to fix a watch with a hammer.
And that's what some of the former federal contracting officers are saying, too. They're like, hey, if you're really serious about making things more efficient, you can't just zero in on GSA contracts. That's way too narrow.
Well, the DoD memo did mention GSA contracts specifically.
Right, but the government buys services in tons of different ways. You got to look at the whole system, the whole ecosystem, to get a clear picture of what's working, what's not.
So it's like looking through a keyhole. You're missing the whole room. You could end up saving money in one area but creating bigger problems somewhere else.
And here's another thing that's got people scratching their heads. Agencies are already supposed to be reviewing their service contracts every single year, right? To make sure they still make sense.
Yeah, exactly. So some people are looking at this sudden push to cancel everything, and they're like, wait, what? Why the panic? Is this just for show?
Little performance for the taxpayers, maybe?
Maybe. It does seem a bit overblown. Okay, we've talked a lot about the potential downsides, all the worries, but is there anything good that could come out of all this? Could there be a silver lining maybe to pulling back from consulting?
I mean, I'm all for saving money, but it has to be done smartly, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's got to be strategic. But yeah, there are some potential upsides. One big one is that it could force agencies to, I don't know, invest more in themselves and building up their own expertise.
Instead of just constantly outsourcing, they could create their own internal consulting teams, right?
Right, like internal think tanks. It wouldn't be easy, though. The government would have to really step up their game when it comes to hiring. I mean, you got to compete with the private sector for those top-tier people.
Yeah, the government's not always known for offering the best salaries and perks.
True, but the benefits of having that expertise in-house, it could be huge. You wouldn't be constantly paying those high consultant fees.
And you're building knowledge that actually stays within the government, not just walking out the door with the consultants.
And who knows, the government's needs better than the people who actually work there.
Right, right. They could actually tailor solutions much more effectively.
Exactly. It's not a magic bullet, though. Some agencies just won't have the resources or the capacity to, build up that expertise from scratch for everything they need.
So maybe it's about figuring out, like, what's core, what's absolutely essential to do ourselves, and what can we maybe still outsource.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance. It's not like consultants are all bad. They bring a lot to the table, but maybe it's time to be a little more, I don't know, picky about how we use them.
Right, more strategic. So in a way, this whole thing is making agencies take a hard look in the mirror, reevaluate how they do business.
It's like a forced restructuring. It's got to be painful, but it could lead to a leaner, meaner government.
A government that actually knows what it's good at, what it needs help with, and isn't afraid to make some tough choices.
Yeah, exactly. It's a big moment for both sides, the government and the consulting world. But let's not forget the people in the middle of all this, the individual consultants, their lives are on the line here.
Right. It's not just numbers on a spreadsheet.
Exactly. For a lot of them, this is a huge shock. They've built their careers around this, and now they're facing a very uncertain future.
And it's not just about the paycheck.
Right.
Many of them are really dedicated to their work, believe in what they're doing.
Yeah, they see themselves as partners, helping the government do important work.
And now it feels like they're being told their expertise isn't needed anymore.
It's a tough spot to be in. This is where communication is so important. Agencies need to be clear about what they're doing, why they're doing it, and treat people with respect, acknowledge their contributions.
Right. Even if the relationship is changing.
Exactly. And consultants, they need to be flexible, think about how they can adapt, maybe specialize more, offer different kinds of services, get creative.
So this is both a challenge and an opportunity, really.
For sure. It's a reminder that even when things are chaotic, when the ground is shifting, you can still find ways to grow, to innovate. It just takes a willingness to change with the times.
Well, this has been really eye-opening. We've covered a lot of ground here, but there's still so much to unpack. So let's take a quick breather, and when we come back, we'll continue our deep dive into the potential long-term impacts of this whole GSA shakeup. Okay, so we've dug into the immediate chaos, but let's zoom out a bit. What could this all mean in the long run? This isn't just a little budget trim, right?
Not even close. We're talking potentially a whole new way the government does business. Like, remember how we talked about agencies building up their in-house expertise?
Yeah, creating their own internal consulting teams.
Yeah. Imagine that on a massive scale. The government workforce looking totally different, way more specialized skills. Agencies becoming less dependent on those big consulting firms.
So like government jobs, but not your typical bureaucrat. We're talking data analysts, cybersecurity specialists, strategic planning gurus. Those could be the hot new government gigs.
Right. But to make that work, the government would have to completely overhaul how they recruit and, more importantly, how they keep those people.
Because if you're competing with Silicon Valley salaries and perks, you got to bring your A game.
Exactly. It would be a huge undertaking, no doubt. But think of the long-term payoff. A more efficient government, better use of taxpayer dollars, and a workforce that's deeply invested in the mission.
Okay, but let's not forget about the consulting giants. They're not just going to roll over.
Oh, they'll adapt. They always do. You might see a wave of mergers, smaller firms getting gobbled up by the bigger ones, and they'll have to get laser focused, specialize in really niche areas where they can prove their worth.
So like instead of trying to be everything to everyone, they become the go-to for, say, AI regulation in healthcare or supply chain cybersecurity for the DoD.
Right. Show those agencies they have unique skills the government can't easily replicate, and they'll probably have to change how they charge. Maybe less hourly rates, more focus on showing concrete results proving their value.
It's like natural selection, survival of the fittest, but for consulting firms.
Exactly. And this whole shakeup, it could actually be a good thing for the industry in the long run. A little bit of pressure can spark a lot of innovation, you know?
So maybe we end up with a more efficient government and a sharper, more agile consulting industry. That's kind of a win-win.
Could be. It's still early, though. We're just at the beginning of this whole saga. Only time will tell how it all plays out.
Well, we started today talking about a GSA memo, a seemingly simple cost-cutting measure, but we ended up going way deeper, exploring the potential for a complete transformation in how the government works and how it interacts with the consulting world.
It's a reminder that change is always happening, especially in government. And sometimes those changes, they have consequences that ripple out way further than anyone initially imagined.
It's like throwing a pebble in a pond and the ripples just keep spreading. We've uncovered a lot today, but there are definitely more layers to this story, more questions to ask. And as always, we encourage you to keep digging, keep asking those tough questions, and stay engaged with the issues that shape our world. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep those brains buzzing.